Well, welcome to the programme. Thank you very much indeed for popping in. Still jet-lagged after coming back from Kenya.
Yes, I am still jet-lagged, unfortunately, but it's nice to be here.
You were in northern Kenya. Tell us a little bit about where you were to start with.
I was in more to the east of Nairobi there, and I was in an area around, it's called the Kilimanjaro district. Very dry at the moment. They're calling it a peri-crisis area, so while the country as a whole is under national emergency crisis, there's areas that are kind of in the heart of the crisis and those that are going to be within days sort of thing, and that's where I was. Yeah.
So it's not just Kenya, is it? It's actually the whole of that sort of area.
Yeah, Somalia, Uganda, Ethiopia, Kenya, the whole lot.
So what are the numbers here? Because I think that's the thing that is always so concerning, is that it's so many people.
It is, and I think the latest I've heard is around 11 million are in acute malnutrition status. I think in Kenya they're talking about between 2.5 and 3.5 million right now, and obviously for ChildFund we're focusing on the young children, and they're extremely vulnerable to anything in the best of times, but sort of through this drought they're dying at 1 in 16 a day in the crisis areas, so it's pretty heartbreaking.
I guess the question that everyone's going to ask is, why has it happened? Because it's not that long ago that we went through the whole Band-Aid and Live Aid thing. It's maybe 15, 20 years since we were doing that.
Right.
How has this sort of snuck up on us?
It's the scale of the drought. It's you know, I was talking with farmers who were saying until 3 years ago they could predict to the day the rains were coming, and that's just not the case anymore. And so with a lot of the populations that are pastoralists that rely on their livestock, the livestock have all died. For agriculturalists, their crops have died, and so they're left with land that's completely unusable. It's dust. There's nothing there. Water supplies have dried up. And so I think the scale of the drought has hit people a lot stronger than they could have predicted. So that's where they're at now.
Do we know why that's happened?
I guess
what's changed?
We could put the finger on climate change, but it really is. It's a shift in climate there, and unfortunately, it's always those that are the most disadvantaged that get struck, and they have been struck quite strongly this time.
We probably tend to think of Kenya as one of the more westernised African countries, and
yeah.
so it almost comes as a surprise that it's hit them so hard. You know, you'd expect some of the poorer African countries to have troubles faced with this, but for Kenya and Uganda, which are relatively wealthy countries, it must be big.
I think there's pockets of wealth in both of them, but still their poverty levels are very, very high, and they always have been. And I think Kenya is often sort of lauded as one of the more successful countries for different reasons. But it's, you know, you go to Nairobi and it looks like a well-structured city, but you get out to the rural areas and it's very, very poor. Yeah, and especially now. When you can't get water, it's very hard to kind of think about development at all. So, you know, for us at the moment, it's really kind of just addressing the crisis and getting water and food to especially the little ones and the pregnant mothers.
So what sort of scale of operation are we talking to? I mean, when we're talking of tens of millions of people,
yeah,
that's a massive, massive operation. So how do you organise the logistics of something like that?
Very well coordinated efforts are needed, and at the moment ChildFund, for example, is working with the World Food Programme, with UN agencies, with a bunch of different aid agencies, and we all do have our areas of focus and then in coordination. So ChildFund alone is looking after around 500,000 children in Kenya, and I think there's about 5.5, they say, in the area of the under 5s that are affected at the moment. So ChildFund's taking their 500,000, and it's still an incredibly huge scale. So,
how successful do you think your efforts can be? Because it's in lots of ways it's a race against time, isn't it?
It is. At the moment, it absolutely is, and they're hoping for the next rains in November, and fingers crossed. I mean, the last rains didn't come at all, so you know, fingers crossed for that. But what we're doing is kind of twofold. First of all, what we need to do, and all agencies need to do, is just address the crisis, get the food, get the shelter and the water to those who need it right now. And that is being done. It is a very well-coordinated effort over there, actually. But then after that, it's the long term. It's like, well, how do you actually keep a population like this prepared for what might happen again? And I think that's what people are all talking about, that it's not going to be solved overnight. So we need support to be able to do this.
Because I guess that's the scary thing, is there's no guarantees that even if the rains do come in November, that this isn't all going to happen again next year.
No, and it's how do you prepare for that kind of thing? So a lot of the people are migratory and they are moving and they're looking for kind of different sources of water, of where they can go after this. And what you're seeing a lot is that the men are doing that. They're off finding the sources. And in the north of Kenya, in the refugee camps, a lot of the areas, it's the women and children that are arriving alone without the men, which puts a lot of burden on the women who are trying to take care of their 3, 4, 5 children. And the last day I was there, the front page of the newspaper was a woman holding the last of her 5th children in her arms. And that's sort of from the last 3 weeks. So
I read, literally just before we came down to do the interview, that many of the men are looking towards the cities, for instance, going into Mogadishu.
Right.
But Mogadishu's, they say, the most dangerous city in the world. So this isn't going to... That's not going to be easy for the men, is it? No,
it's not. And I think people want to be able to protect their families however they can, and I think people are just really doing that. They're looking for any way possible that they can protect them. But going to the urban centres, I guess, is where they have at least a gathering of people, and you can find supplies there, is the hope, I think. But what we're doing is working a lot with the early childhood years and setting up the preschools in the area. And it might not sound like the biggest need right now, but what it does, we're working on 300 preschools across the area. And it's a place to have shelter, to gather the young ones, and where the health workers can come and test the little ones to see how their nutritional status, give them food, water that they need. So I think it's hard for children, mothers, fathers, all of them,
You're obviously back here in New Zealand, and eventually you won't be jet lagged anymore. Sooner or later.
I wait for that day.
But how easy is it to explain to people what's going on? Because there are so many competing calls on our giving. Yeah,
there are, and I think it's always a challenge to kind of get the message across to people. And like we were saying, the numbers, the scale of this is so huge that it's very difficult sometimes to actually articulate that scale of need. And so for us, it's bringing it down to the personal level. And for me, I met mothers who are having to make choices at the moment about which children they can support and which they can't. And that's something that a mother, just should never have to do. So for me, telling the message here, I think it's finding the right way to tell the message and finding the human angle within the story. So.
Well, I hope you find some support here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thanks.